When you're talking about creativity, are you sort of wide open with that? Is that sort of creativity at work? Is that creative endeavors, artistic creativity? What are you talking about there?
Yeah, I would say we're pretty wide open about it. I've been hearing a lot of energy around like how to co-create community and how creativity comes into nurturing connections. I like thinking about writing right now. I think that's fun to think about. We are trying to, with this cadre, to talk across professions as well.
Well, I think what comes to mind for me is that, creativity, I think in many, if not all domains, I guess, is about risk taking, and
Mm,
it's about playing with possibility. It's probably about being willing to try something and not be happy with the outcome necessarily,
mhm.
to experiment. These days, my two primary creative endeavors are writing and photography, which are both pretty solitary.
Mhm.
But, I think when I write, I don't know, I think I at least spend some of that writing time with, other people in my head, right? Who I'm writing to or writing for. And so I can imagine that if I constantly imagine being rejected by those people, not being able to have healthy connection with those people, that would really block my writing.
Mhm.
But because I have enough people in my orbit who I think receive my writing and are enthusiastic about it. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not sometimes critical of it. So it's not about not getting critique, because I think that, critique that comes, or assessment, again, that comes in the space of a connected relationship, can be incredibly valuable. So it's not about no critique, but it's about knowing that my sense of belonging and connection with these people doesn't hinge on whether or not they like what I'm writing, right?
Yeah.
So when I think about the relational paradox, right, I might hesitate to get involved in something because I'm afraid of being rejected, right? I'm afraid of getting in there and feeling like I don't belong, I'm not making connections. So if I am struggling with that, if I'm operating from that place, then I think it's far less likely that I'll take the risks, the intellectual and artistic and creative risks that I would need to take to be creative in that work situation or that community situation or whatever. If, on the other hand, I am confident that I have connection in a community or workplace, that I, belong, that I will be received, then I think it opens me up to take those risks, to play with ideas, to try ideas out, to be okay with something not working out the way I had hoped.
I keep thinking of a friend of mine who always tells me that I need to reach for more no's. I can see how the central relational paradox might keep us out of taking risks and how important risks are to creativity.
Or to be willing to put an idea out there that might not resonate for other people, and to know that I'm still okay. I mean, I guess that seems like a big piece, resonance, right? Both in connection and creativity, and involves some wish for resonance, for a feeling that the work is connecting with someone, is received by
Yeah.
someone, and it can still be getting critique. I interviewed matched pairs of recent alums and faculty who had meaningful academic relationships, and one of the things that came up was that when students had a meaningful relationship with a faculty member, they were actually very receptive to the feedback. And I think people were sort of outside teaching might assume that if teachers and students have a good relationship, can the teacher be as objective, and will the student take them seriously and all that? And what I found was that when a student gets feedback from a professor they feel connected to, what happens is they hear that feedback as, this person thinks I can do better. I mean, I don't know about you, but in my student days, I occasionally would be like, oh, Professor so-and-so is having a bad day, or Professor so-and-so doesn't like me, or, you make up these reasons why the
Yeah.
prof gave you this negative feedback. But when critique or feedback comes in the context of real connection, I think then it's much more typically understood as, this person believes in me, this person sees my potential.
Mm.
So, that would be true in writing, that would be true in an art studio, that would be true in a drama, program or whatever, I think.
So really like what we're saying is that a sense of belonging and connection generates more creativity.
Maybe it's a container that's, or a space that is sort of fertile for creativity or something. I hadn't thought about it in that way, but I think maybe it opens up the space for creativity. I mean, you could also
Mhm.
look at positive psychology, right? And Barbara Fredrickson's work, she talks about that positive emotional states allow us to take risks, right? And to experiment and to be creative, and negative states like anger and fear and so on, we get into more of a fight or flight. And so we're not going to be creative because we're not generating possibilities. We're just trying to survive in the moment. And I've always thought that really parallels what happens when there's good relational connection or toxic connection, right? So in good relational connection, again, we are not in fight or flight mode. We are, we feel freer to experiment, to try on things, to try on, a sense of self, to say like, hey, I'm thinking about going to graduate school. What do you think? Or I'm thinking about changing careers. What do you think? Like I'm willing to take those risks. Whereas if I'm afraid that at any moment this connection or relationship is going to fall apart, or this person is like harshly judgmental or toxic in some way, I'm probably not going to put those things out there in the same way. So
at the very least, like a sense of not fitting in and not belonging makes it difficult to be creative.
There's a story on PBS NewsHour last night about, I believe it was a Black American artist. His art that he's doing right now, I just sort of caught the end of it, but he works a lot, I think, in like ceramics and stuff. And so he makes these tea sets, like teapots and teacups. I think he makes them and they look like sort of the really sort of traditional European tea sets, right? But then he puts these images on maybe Rosa Parks and of, images of Black family life and all of that. And he said, the part I did catch was, he said this comes from when he was in art school. First of all, he sort of didn't understand like the obsession with tea. It didn't resonate for him. But also that I think he felt like that whole, like he was just still being seen as a man of color and not as an artist. And so in responding to that, he's really like found part of his voice in this.
Yeah.
But so there's an example of not belonging and finding one's creative voice in the experience of not belonging.
The ways that we have to contort ourselves to fit into relationships and connection could foster creativity.
Well, but I think it depends, because some relationships could do that depending on the person and the circumstance. I wrote a piece last night about resilience, just a little comment on it. And what I was saying was, they compare resilience to bending a fork. And although the fork may bend back into shape, there has been trauma that the fork has experienced. And it may not ever go back to being completely the way it was, depending on the intensity of the bend. I think the same thing applies with when you're in spaces that may contort you, that, there may be the ability to create out of, not because you choose to. I think it's more out of survival. So there's that piece of it. But then I think there's the other piece for some people, that when they're in relationships that are not life-giving, that they don't necessarily bounce back, and it restrains them from being who they, were designed to be. So I think it could go either way.
Yeah.
So I don't want to overstate that connection is like a predictor or condition for creativity, but I do certainly believe that it helps fuel creativity, and maybe it opens the door for the possibilities of creativity. So many standards of, what's considered to be good writing, what's considered to be meaningful art, meaningful storytelling. Look at the Emmys, right? In this past week, there were a lot of Black nominees and there were a lot of white winners. When we look at Maureen's work and the way that the culture itself is a source of disconnection, by and large, the broader US culture is still, I think, really celebrates white standards of good writing and beauty and storytelling and all of that. And so, it's another way in which, right, cultural context is really incredibly relevant.
I think I remember Amy even saying at one of the RCT meetings about that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger isn't true at all.
No. And I think that is problematic as a society, that we keep telling people, just push through it, and not really creating spaces for folks to pause, to really see how they are being restricted and restrained. I think it could go either way depending on how much bending has happened. Because after a certain amount of time, and my daughter and I were talking about this morning, and she gave a great analogy, and she's like a rubber band, Mom. She goes, yeah, to bounce back. She goes, but it depends on how far it's been pulled. She said, because it's going to lose some of its elasticity. I think that's the same thing for us as human beings. So if you're in relationships that are causing trauma over and over again, the ability to bounce back, you're going to be stretched so differently. You're probably not going to have the same ability to get right back because of what's been pulled from you. So I think it just really depends on how far you're being pulled.
Oh, that's good stuff.
Instead of it being the either or that we tend to live in, I think it's creating that space for both and. How is it that you can be in a space that is restrictive and there is this creativity that may happen, or a space that is restrictive and you are being restricted because of the space? Those multiple realities can exist at the same time. And I think we have to be okay with the messiness of that. It is messy. Relationships are messy. Life is messy. I think we always want to put bows on stuff and it's oozing out. And sometimes we just got to look at it and go, yeah, that's messy.
Yeah.
And not always want to go clean it up immediately. Sometimes
That's the thing. We got to let it be messy.
we got to sit in it. We got to sit in it, because otherwise you miss some things in your rush to change it. Yeah. And so you recreate it again because you had learned from what made the spill happen the first time. That's how relationships are.
Yeah.